I'm so uncomfortable right now. Like, I cannot tell you, it's so uncomfortable and sweaty and hot. Like, yesterday was the hottest day of the year here and I hated it. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I was going to say welcome back to my video, that's not it. Welcome back to my channel. This is a video that I'm very excited for. It's another reading vlog and it's another one in my reading my favourite booktubers' favourite books series. It's taken me a while to get to do another one of these. It's because I just want to make sure I pick the right people because I have so many favourite booktubers that I can't pick all of them. So I just like, you know, mainly focusing on the ones where I sort of know that I'll probably end up enjoying their books, which maybe isn't the best thing to do. Like, maybe I should be going for some books that are, you know, a little bit more out of my comfort zone. But I think to start off with, we're sticking within the realm of like people whose favourite books that I have read, I have enjoyed, and therefore I'll probably enjoy the other favourite books that they have. Anyway, not only is this person one of my favourite booktubers, she is also just one of my favourite people on the internet, full stop. So in this video, I am going to be reading 3 of one of my very good friend Emily's favourite books. I'm super excited. If you are unaware, Emily is from the channel The Three Bears Book Cottage. So I asked Emily to send me a list of some of her favourite books, and a lot of them were actually ones that I've read and have enjoyed in the past. I decided to pick 3 of the books that sort of sounded the most interesting to me, and 3 of them that I obviously hadn't read beforehand. These 3 books are also books that I have known about for a while and that I've been interested in picking up anyway, so I thought this was a great excuse to do that. As if I needed excuses to buy books and read them. But I'm just going to talk to you about the books. So we're going to go very briefly because I'll probably talk a little bit more about them when I do start reading them. And I'm not quite sure, I think I know which book I'm going to start with, so I will tell you about that one first. One of the books that Emily actually spoke about in her, I think it was like her spring reading wrap up or something like that, that she said was actually one of her favourites ever at this point, is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. I have not read anything else by this author. I've never read any of her books, even though there's so many that sound, well, I've only heard of 2 others aside from this one, but like there's 2 that sound really interesting as well. There's one that's like inspired by Rumpelstiltskin, and for some reason I was obsessed when I heard about the story of Rumpelstiltskin. I don't know what it is, like something about this little creature like jumping around like an evil little twat. I don't know. Deadly Education is essentially set at a boarding school where there's like the education, I mean it's a deadly education, right? So they're basically like, these students are like fighting for their lives all the time. They don't really have teachers, like they don't actually learn anything aside from first-hand learning of like, you know, monsters trying to kill them and then they have to fight them. So honestly, I think this might be the book that I'm the most excited for just because I really like the premise. Also, this cover is gorgeous. The second book that I've got here, which is one that I've known about for years, like literally years, and I have always been like, yes, I'd like to pick it up, but then there's always been books that I've sort of prioritised over this, so I never got it. But now I have, and I'm very excited. The premise is super intriguing, and that is We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. And yeah, as I said, this was like super popular like a couple of years back. Like everyone was talking about this. People still talk about it. I think it's like still a very, very popular book. I've just heard really great things about this. I guess this is kind of like a thriller because essentially it's about someone who goes to, is it like to a family place or something like that, like goes to spend every summer with her family in a certain place, and then one year she goes and like something happened and she can't really remember what it is or something like that, and then eventually you find out what happened at the end of the book. I think that's kind of like the premise, and it just sounds really intriguing. This is a relatively short book, so I should be able to get through this quite quickly. So I'm very excited. And the third and final book is one that I haven't known about for too long. I think basically since it was released, which wasn't even that long ago. I think it was 2020, was it? This book is The Vanishing Half. I think this is the longest one of all the ones I've got here. This is like a literary fiction, I want to say. Britt Bennett is also the author of The Mothers, which I have read, and I don't know, it was a good book. It wasn't my favourite. I think I gave it like 3 stars. This one sounds more interesting to me. The Vanishing Half is about, if you haven't heard of this already, you probably have, because it's like also a really hyped up book. And this is about 2 identical twins who grow up in a small southern black community, and then it says here that they run away when they're 16, and then basically they're both quite, I don't know, I believe that they're relatively light-skinned. Basically, they end up going their separate ways. One of them lives in like a white community and sort of passes as being white, and the other lives in a black community. It's basically explaining, exploring sort of the differences between a white community and a black community, and sort of like the effect that it has on their lives. And I think it's going to be very interesting and a very moving and a very important story, especially for me to read as someone who's clearly very privileged because of the colour of my skin, which is ridiculous, but it is true nonetheless. So I'm very excited to read this and find out more about this whole situation. I'm very excited to read all 3 of these. I'm going to start reading one of these books. I think as I said, I'm going to be starting at Deadly Education. I'm currently also in the middle of doing another vlog, so I will finish that book at some point. I don't know when I will be updating this vlog, but it will be at some point during the process of reading one of these 3. I think the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to film, because there's 3 books, I don't want this vlog to be way too long, so I might start reading a book, give you my initial thoughts, and then finish the book, and then give you my final thoughts, and then obviously continue with the next one, and then the 3rd one, and then we will conclude all my thoughts on all these books, and see how well Emily did at, you know, favouriting things, having favourites. I don't know what I'm saying. Yeah, I wanted to give you a quick update on A Deadly Education. I'm on page 64 now. So I've read like 3 chapters and I have thoughts, which is very good because like that's great when you're doing a reading vlog to have thoughts about the books you're reading. Very good. I'm really enjoying this book so far. There's some things that I'm really enjoying about it, and I will just preface by saying that I don't read a lot of books that are to do with like magic and magic schools and stuff like that. The thing that I enjoy the most about this that I haven't gotten as much from, I mean, if we're just sort of talking generally about sort of witches and magic and stuff like that, the sort of approach that this has to the magic system and like the way that people get magic is super interesting. It's probably my favourite sort of approach that I've read before, because basically this feels very tied to real life witchcraft, real life like magic, like, or like practice of magic, because like we don't actually know if magic exists. However, I will say that obviously like everyone knows that witchcraft is a thing and that people do, like they still practice witchcraft, but it was obviously more prominent like a while ago, and there's mention of things like mana. This feels like a lot more grounded, I think, than a lot of other sort of magic books that I've read, or books about magic and people who practice magic, because a lot of the time you read it and you're like, ooh, they say these crazy made up words and then the things happen. But this, it's like they learn actual real life languages, whether they're languages we use today or they're dead languages. Like the main character, she basically is at the moment I think studying like 5 different languages, which is like from German to like Old English, Middle English, things like that. So it's very interesting in the fact that it's like really connected to real life and like real life languages and real life history and stuff like that. And the main character, she is a lot of fun. She is so much fun. One thing that I'm super happy about is that the main character is, I believe, mixed race. Like I want to say that she's half British and half Indian heritage wise, because I'm not quite sure about her mum, but I know that her dad comes from, I believe it's India, because they talk about his family being in Mumbai. So I feel like she's mixed race, which is great representation. I think a lot of people always say that she's witty, she's sarcastic, she's sassy, and I can get that. I get that from her 100%. She is also just like very reluctant to form alliances with people, despite the fact that that's kind of, you know, what you need to do. She's got a very matter-of-fact approach to things, which I feel like I can resonate with. She kind of reminds me of myself in certain ways, like in the fact that she's very like, I don't like people. I don't want to just have to be friends with people just for the sake of it, just to like, you know, save my own neck or whatever. But she also knows she has to do it. So I like that about her. I think she's very fun. I can just see that this is going to be great. I'm looking forward to hearing about more of the sort of the creatures that are trying to kill them. They are called Mals or Maleficents or something or other like that. Which basically comes from the name Malia, which is like the bad, like the dark magic or whatever. So like mana is like good magic and Malia is the bad magic. So yeah, I'm intrigued to see where this goes. I'm about to film another video, so I thought that I would just quickly give you an update. To be fair, I needed to update this vlog anyway. Yesterday I decided to join Lucy, who is one of my friends. She was doing a 24-hour readathon. It's still ongoing, so I should be reading now, but I was like, I want to film a video, so I'm going to be doing that. And then I'm going to be getting back to the books. But I did manage to stay up and finish. I did the education, and I'm super happy I did that just because I needed to. Like, I need to read these books and get them done as soon as possible. So I'm super happy. But it was also just, I feel like this was a perfect book personally for me to read basically in one sitting. I mean, I did read this over the period of a couple of days, but like the majority of it, I think I basically just sat and read, or at least like 150 pages to 200 pages I just sat and read sort of almost straight out. And I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed that process. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. It didn't quite have that 5-star feel for me, but like I still loved it, and I love the characters. I particularly love the characters. I think that the main character is just one of the best main characters that I've ever read before. She, in certain ways, as I said before, reminded me of myself, but she was also just a really fun character to read about. And I just liked how sassy she was, how like cranky she was at certain times, and like she could be really mean. And I think she sort of had this hard exterior of being like, I don't want to talk to anyone, like I'm a mean person, like I don't want to get along with people, but I think deep down she did. I just really liked reading about that. I just thought those kind of characters are just really fun to read about, in my opinion personally, like the people who sort of give off a harder exterior but deep down are just softies. And her relationship with this other person called Orion, which, by the way, Orion, when you read it, it looks like onion. I kept on reading onion, and I was like, why is she like talking about an onion, and why is onion with a capital O? And then I realised it was Orion. But it's also just a weird name. It's a weird name. Her relationship with him is just, I loved it. It was once again one of those things where I think because I haven't been in any relationships, like I don't understand how it works in real life. So like whenever a relationship like this, I mean, a lot of people critique it as being like, I don't know, a bit odd that she's like, one moment she's like, oh, I don't want to talk to you, and then the next moment like she's really kind of soft towards people or soft towards him or whatever. And like, I don't understand real life relationships, so I'm like, yes, I will take that. I think that's a bloody brilliant relationship. Once again, like, this is fictional, so it doesn't matter if it's like a real life relationship or not. I just thought it was a lot of fun to read. I really liked their relationship. I just thought there was a lot of banter. It just felt very witty, very fun, very fresh. And I will say that some people say that not a lot happens plot-wise. I don't think it's the most plot-driven book in the world, especially the premise. You would think that the plot would be the sort of driving force. I don't think it is. I think the characters are the driving force, but for me, like, I loved the characters so much that they literally could have been sitting around doing nothing and I would have been happy to read about them because I just thought they were a lot of fun. Emily, you did well. This is a good book. It's a good favourite. And going on from that, I did start We Were Liars this morning. I'm currently on page 60 or something like that. I've just gotten to I've just gotten to the start of part 3. So basically we've been introduced to the main character, we've been introduced to her family. The whole premise is basically, as I kind of mentioned before, there's this main character who has a very rich family who kind of own their own private island. On that island they have like houses, so they all go to the same island, this family, every summer and just spend the time there together. And then one summer something happens she gets in an accident, and then she just basically can't remember anything sort of like the time surrounding the accident, and she's trying to figure out what it is. I've just basically read up until the point where she has the accident, and now she's just had it and she's kind of trying to figure out what's happening and stuff like that. She is clearly very ill, very affected by it, as well as her memory just not being great, and she's trying to figure out what's going on. And I've been enjoying it so far. Like, I don't really have much to say. I think that it's been good. I can see that it has potential to be great. I'm kind of feeling like this book is gonna really depend on the ending, because that's what I've heard, is that the ending is just like mind-blowing and stuff like that. I'm gonna go now because I've been chatting about this for a while. I will come back when I finish this. Obviously I've still got one more book to read, and then we'll be done. Are we ready? Are we ready for this? I don't know if I'm ready for this. I got to the last section of We Were Liars, and I read literally the first couple of lines of the last section, and my jaw dropped. And then I was like, shit, why didn't I just record that? I had fully thought about recording my reaction, and I just didn't. So now we're recording. Got 20 pages left. Whew. Okay. Bloody hell. What? Oh my god. Oh my god. Right. Off the bat, I'm giving this a rating. I don't usually like to give ratings straight after I've finished, because sometimes I feel like my final thoughts blur the whole reading process, but I'm gonna give this 5 stars straight away. Like, if I could give it more than 5 stars, I would, because first of all, if we're going off enjoyment, I enjoyed this thoroughly. There was not a part of it where I did not want to read it. I continued reading and I enjoyed, and I managed to read this within the space of like literally a day, and that for me personally is a feat, because although I can read fast, I don't tend to gravitate towards reading books within one day, because I usually just can't focus on it. So I think that that really says something about this book. Enjoyment is a 5 out of 5 stars. The actual quality of it was just phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And the thing is, I've heard, like, this author's other books I've not heard good things about. This is the only one that I'd really heard good things about, and I am really intrigued to see what the other books are like. If maybe this was, I don't like to say it, but a fluke, maybe for the author. Maybe they just happened to find like a niche where this particular story worked really well for them, and then the other ones don't, or something. So that would be really interesting to read the other ones. But honestly, just the way the author writes, first of all, is very bitty. It's very like short sentences. You kind of don't know what's going on. You feel like the narrator, like you feel like her, because she's trying to figure out what's going on. She's like, I don't know what's happened, something happened to me, but I don't understand it. And bit by bit, she's getting that information. And we're obviously following along with her. There are things said throughout this book that make sense in the context of what you're reading. And you draw conclusions. You're like, oh, this person said this thing. Well, it must mean this. Like, that makes sense. People say that all the time. Like, I understand why they said that. It's because of this. And then you get to the end, and it's just completely flipped on its head. Like, and it's not even one of those things where, like, it's a massive shock and you're like, okay, yeah, that's a big shock, but I don't really get it. Honestly, it's so good. Wow. I'm just amazed. I knew I was going to enjoy this. I didn't realise I was going to like it this much. As I said before, there was just this moment where I was like, oh my god. And the thing is, I thought that because the big reveal wasn't just right at the end, there was like, it was you know, we had like 20 pages after the big reveal, so I was like, well, what are you going to do with those 20 pages, miss? Like, what are you doing with them? Why have we got 20 pages left? We already know what's happened. And the author did a really good job of sort of fizzling it out and explaining it, so that not only have you got this big plot twist and you're like, oh my god, jaw dropped, like I am absolutely flabbergasted, she also explains it. It all makes sense. One thing that I really like is the kind of, it's got almost like a cyclical structure, because it starts off with the character introducing themselves and saying, this is my name, this is where I'm from, this is a little bit about me, and then she makes this kind of joke saying, she says, my full name is Cadence Sinclair Eastman, I suffer migraines, I do not suffer fools. I like a twist of meaning, and I like that bit. I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm just going to say I like it. It starts with it, it ends with it. It also has more meaning for the whole plot, but I'm not going to say what, because I do not want to ruin it for anyone that has not read this and still wants to. And even if you don't want to, I say read it. If you trust me, read it, because anyway, we're going to leave it at that. So far, Emily is doing very well, because we've got 4.5 stars and 5 stars. Can you tell that I am like the least critical ratings giver ever? I'm just like, a 5 star to you, a 5. I'm basically the Oprah of 5 stars. I just give them to everyone and to everything. I'm gonna pick up the Vanishing, I want to say the Vanishing Stare. That's not it, it's the Vanishing Half. I'm gonna pick it up at some point. I will talk to you when I've read some of it. And yes, I don't know what I'm doing. Goodbye. Read this. Hello, I'm back. I have a little update. I finished this book. I didn't even say that I was starting it. I mean, I mentioned that I was going to start it at some point. I didn't end up doing like a, you know, first thoughts update. I couldn't I couldn't stop myself from carrying on reading, and I couldn't be asked to film, basically, is what I'm saying. But I have read this, and I did really enjoy it. First of all, as I said before, I read The Mothers, and I gave it 3 stars, I think. I didn't really enjoy it that much. Like, I did enjoy it, but it wasn't, like, mind-blowing for me. This, however, I think is superior to The Mothers. I think maybe it's just the storylines that I find more interesting. Honestly, I could not tell you really what The Mothers is about. Like, I can't remember it all that much. And like, saying that, I don't know, that could happen with this as well. My memory's not great in general, but I think that I enjoyed this more. One thing that I noticed with this is that there's one particular storyline that I'm more interested in, and I think it comes more from a personal, like, you know, what I'm more invested in and what I'm more interested in. It's a really interesting look at racism, particularly racism against African American people. Like, that's kind of what it centers around, right? So it's just focused on the idea that, like, I don't know, I think a lot of the time you hear racism and you think, oh yeah, racism is white people discriminating against African American people, and like, that is a very big part of it. However, this really takes up the idea that racism doesn't just affect, it's not just solely between white people and African American people. The difference between being a dark-skinned African American and being light-skinned, and also like the thoughts that African Americans have about themselves based off of what they have learnt from, you know, systemic racism, from growing up in a world that is inherently against them because of the colour of their skin. This is mainly set like in the 50s, 60s, going into the 70s and the 80s. And it's interesting to see those different time periods, because you see how it shifts, how it sort of goes from like, oh, black people, especially dark-skinned black people, could never do anything. Like, they, you know, they're sort of the lowest of society, they won't get anything done. Like, they have to just accept the fact that they're probably just going to be waiting on white people the rest of their life, unless they decide to sort of pass as a white person. There's so, like, this is such an interesting book, and I think sort of intellectually it is definitely just is phenomenal. It's really like the things that are brought up in here, and just the level of nuance that it has. Like, it's not just a typical story of race. It is so much more than that. It's really intersectional. There's so much to do with like race in terms of the economy, race in terms of how African American people view themselves, as I said, how they view each other based off of how dark their skin is, that there's like this level of racism. The town this is set in at the beginning is a predominantly light-skinned African American town, and there is this racism where anyone that's darker skinned is automatically seen as being lesser, because they have learnt from white people that the darker your skin is, the less worth you have, which obviously is bullshit, but that is just the way that they've been brought up. And it's an interesting thing to read, because a lot of the narratives you get are white people being racist towards black people. You don't see how that actually trickles down into the psyche and the way of thinking of each other that some African Americans had at that point, and probably still now. Another thing that I didn't really realise going into this, I'm sure that I have seen it on lists that have been like, you know, books with characters that are LGBTQIA+, but I didn't really think about it going into it. And then there's this storyline with someone who is part of the queer community, and I'm not going to say exactly what it is, because for me it was a really pleasant sort of surprise in a way. Like, even though it shouldn't be a surprise, like, it was just really nice to read. And this character, they felt like they'd been put in just as themselves. Like, it didn't feel like they were there to serve the narrative a purpose. It didn't feel like they were there to fulfill anything. It just felt like they were there because in real life, some people happen to be queer, some people happen to be trans, non-binary, whatever, and their life isn't just revolved around their queerness or their transness or them being non-binary. Like, it's not all about sexuality and gender, and especially because this is so focused on race, it's nice to see that, like, you can have that intersectionality without it being about the fact that, like, you know, this one character, like, they're queer and their queerness serves a purpose, because, like, that's not how it works in real life. I just really appreciated that, and it felt like, while there definitely were sort of things pointing towards, like, or like mentions of them being discriminated against because of who they were, it wasn't like the main thing in their storyline. Really, they were there to be a supportive character, a supportive person towards one of the people that they were around. And I really enjoyed this. I found it really interesting. So this is kind of split up into different narratives, because you kind of start off with the twins who go their separate ways. One of the twins, as I said, has a dark-skinned daughter, and then we start following her. And then at another point we follow the daughter who decided to pass as white, and then we end up following her daughter. So it's like we follow some different narratives. I was very, very invested in the narrative with the daughter of the twin that decided not to pass, who sort of lived her life as African American, and she meets someone called Reese, who is just the sweetest man that I have ever read about. Like, he honestly, very, very sweet. Like, together they had moments of conflict, but it never felt like it was put in there just for the sake of it. It felt very real, it felt very natural. They felt sincere, and like, honestly, like I was just reading about real life people, and it really warmed my heart. They had gone through traumatic events, and like they had been subject to discrimination because of the way that they look and the body that they were in, and like their outer exterior, that they had no choice of like looking like that. That's just the way they are. And despite all that, like, they end up finding each other and just being so supportive of each other and kind of understanding each other because of that, which is something that I find very tragic, that a lot of the times people that are open-minded, the reason they're open-minded is because they've been through trauma themselves. Not always. Like, you find people who haven't been through traumatic experiences who are still very open-minded and, like, you know, believe that everyone's equal, but a lot of the times the people that sort of flock together to help each other are all the ones that have, you know, experienced trauma. I kind of wish that there was a separate book just for these two people, because they also have friends around them that I thought would have made a very interesting book, like just having that kind of like community that they had around them sort of described, and, you know, going into that. It also touched upon, very, very shortly, it touched upon the AIDS pandemic. She couldn't like write more about it because then it would take up too much space, and like there's not enough space to fit in all the issues in the world, right? But like that was nice to just have like a little nod to acknowledge the fact that when you're writing about the 80s, that's kind of just something that comes along with it, especially as she was writing a little bit about the queer community as well, that it kind of like it fits in there, and, you know, it's something that you kind of in a way should, and like I personally think you should acknowledge if you're writing about the 80s. But yes, I clearly had a lot of thoughts about this book. I enjoyed this book immensely, and clearly there were loads of amazing things, and I think from like an academic, from an intellectual standpoint, this was definitely like 4.55. Personally, off of enjoyment, because there was one part that I found a lot more exciting and interesting than the other parts, and like the other parts were not difficult to read, but they just weren't, I wasn't enamored by them, I'm gonna end up giving this 4 stars. But I still think that's really good. Like, that is really good. My ratings of like literary fiction tend to be lower because I don't necessarily enjoy them as much, but I always find them really interesting and sort of fascinating, the topics that they can bring up. So, we are finally done. I've read the 3 books that I decided to read that were Emily's favourites, and as you can see, it went really well. I'm very happy with the 3 books I decided. Obviously, I said before I was kind of playing it safe. I ended up giving a 4 star, a 4.5 and a 5 star, which is very good. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you in my next one.